Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Very straightforward topic for you today. Let's do it. Security guards of Reddit. What's your scariest or creepiest story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so I've heard quite a few creepy stories from coworkers. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed-down arena. The building is more than 100 years old, but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city is keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms, and a separate, smaller community theater type stage that's upstairs. The usual guard is doing his rounds through the building. The building itself is very interesting, as it's largely unchanged since its heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely dark and are pretty creepy. Anyway, the guard is doing his normal rounds, but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post, but something feels different today. He's feeling jumpy, but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy, so he walks every floor of the building. He's in the very top of the catwalk system, above the main arena, where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow wooden catwalk system. Suddenly, he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The guy is frozen mid-strike, like he's being tiptoed up behind him. Guy has an unsettling, mischievous-looking smile on his face, like he's been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Dude has a big steel pipe in his hand instead of a cookie, though. Guard pulls his gun, and Guy takes off running in the opposite direction and disappears into the labyrinth of the building. Cops come and sweep the building with a canine, but don't find him. They do find that he's been playing in the dust that's on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is it was some crazy homeless guy that had been hiding in the building a few days and had made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. I saw the writing still on the counters the last time I was there. Used to work at a hospital that was mainly used for mental health. It had fully secured floors, and it was our job to control combative patients. Many patients were waiting for felony trials, so lots of stories. The worst was we did a welfare check on a vehicle in our ER parking lot. They'd been sitting there around an hour or so. The guy inside the car wasn't responding to our attempts to get his attention. Opened his car door up, and he was trying to dig his own foot off with a flathead screwdriver. He'd gotten all the way down to the ankle bones on one whole side. We had to wrestle him into the ER, as he was on a ton of meth. Seeing the ankle like that, and the guy's almost feral-like state, was like something out of a zombie movie. Boy, meth sounds really fun. I mean, being sarcastic. My grandfather-in-law worked for a private security company as an armed guard for a while in the 80s. It was a smaller company that mostly loaned out guards for short-term work. Things like guarding construction sites, conventions, that kind of thing. Him and one other guy from the company were posted at a department store mini-mall that had recently had someone drive a freaking car through one of the atriums, Blues Brothers style. The guards were to patrol the mall and the outside grounds because with the atrium destroyed, they had no real way to lock up the building on account of the huge hole in it. They had to put up some boards and such, but it wouldn't have taken much at all to move them and get inside. The mall had a small bank in it as well as a pharmacy and electronic stores. The owners were terrified someone was going to use the damage as an excuse to break in, so they contracted armed guards to patrol it and had their normal night watchmen, who were apparently a real old-timer, just kind of hang out and watch the cameras instead of doing rounds. Easy work, right? Well, the mall closes, and my grandpa and his partner show up. They do a walk of the mall, test all the doors they can, make sure what alarms that exist are armed, all our standard stuff. They radio into the watchman, that they're going to do a once around the outside of the mall to test the doors from the outside and to check for anything odd. The watchman radios back an okay, and they head out, each going different directions and locking the door behind them. My grandpa is walking along the back of the mall, testing service doors and such, when his partner yells at him over the radio, "Barrier shredded! There's a huge hole! Get here fast!" My grandpa takes off in a dead sprint. As he runs, he radios the watchman, asking what's going on. He gets no reply. He radios him again, yelling, trying to get him to respond. Silence. He arrives at the barrier with the other guard, and sure enough, there's a hole just big enough for a person to crawl through that's been shredded out of the plywood. It looks like someone dug through it with something sharp. My grandpa crouches down and shines his light through the hole. But again, this is the 80s, and incandescent flashlights don't exactly cut through the dark like flashlights we have today, so he can't see anything weird inside. He turns to his partner and says they need to call the police. But this being the 80s, cell phones aren't super common yet, so if they're going to do it, they need to get inside the mall and find a phone. They try radioing the watchman again and still get no reply. They get their guns out and squeeze through the hole and start advancing toward the security office. Most of the stores have shutters that are down, so it's pretty straight shot. As they make their way there, they hear an earth-shakingly loud scream. He said it sounded like a person with a chest the size of a car was just screaming as loudly as savagely as they could. They both turned towards where the sound came from, which is a grocery store. It's the only store inside the mall that doesn't have a shutter on account of how large it is. They start moving that way because they still can't reach the watchman and are worried whatever screamed may have him. As they get closer, they hear something tearing the place up, just raising hell in the store. They shout that they're security and that they're armed and to come out with your hands up. No sooner than they had yelled, a huge effing mountain lion threw itself around the corner. Both him and his partner unloaded on the thing, just completely dumped their guns into it. My grandpa said that his partner was so terrified that he almost passed out. The mountain lion was clearly not well, as its face was all shredded, and it had a bunch of infected wounds all over it. They guessed that it was probably rabid, so they stayed well back from it. As soon as the commotion was over, the watchman comes on the radio in a panic, asking what was happening. The old-timer had fallen asleep with the cameras and missed everything. He said that was the only time in his entire time as a guard that he ever had to unholster his sidearm, much less fire it. Once, we had a seemingly homeless guy crawl into a crawl space trying to hide in our casino. He suffocated, and we found his body 5 days later after a smell and biomatter had appeared on one side of the wall. Got a call on the radio about something happening in the bathroom of our main building as there was a crowd forming. My brother and I approached the scene on foot since we were a walking distance away. We walked into the bathroom and I could see two very pale, blue-veined legs in one of the stalls. A man died on the toilet. His wife and kids were there, and apparently the last thing the woman said to her husband was, "Could you hurry it up? You're slowing us down." It was one thing to see the body, and another to see the look on the kids' faces when they found out. Apart from the usual voices you hear, shades you see, light cracks, creepy old buildings, etc., one night I was passing by a playground park at around 3 a.m. and spotted an adult male and what appears to be a kid, 5 to 6 years of age, both swinging in total silence on them swings you have for children. It was cold, rainy, and both of them were poorly clothed for this type of year, and especially weather. Didn't seem homeless, though. Pretty unusual stuff to do at 3 a.m. with a kid, you would say. I had lots of different things cross my mind that moment, so decided to take a closer look, since I thought I was tripping. As soon as I got close enough for them to see me, still far from them, they just stared at me for a brief second and started running as fast as they could, again without a single word spoken or voice or sound being made. Not sure where they ran, because I had to scratch my eyes for a second time to check if I was asleep or not. It isn't creepy or scary as the other stories in the comments, but it was definitely a what the F, bruh moment for me.
What do you mean that isn't creepy or scary? That's creepy as hell. Yeah, that would freak me out. I don't know if I'd want to follow them out of curiosity or whatnot, but no, that qualifies for sure.
I was a security guard in an old folks' home that was essentially two buildings, with a smaller building between them that acted as a lobby. One building was for assisted living, and the other was for palliative care. I was in charge of doing a security check of every floor, including the boiler room and basement. One night, I took the elevator down to the basement and hit the light switch, walking down the hall toward the boiler room. About halfway there, the lights started shutting off at the ballast, one after the other. Now, normally I'm not in any way afraid of the dark, but on this particular night, I started on a mad dash back to the elevator before the lights went off completely, because there were no windows in the basement. It would have been too dark to see. In the process of running, I realized that the elevator had lost power as well, so I got to just stand there in the pitch black darkness until someone upstairs got everything back on again. All in all, I spent 23 minutes down there in the dark. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. I was doing security in a hospital at the time. Decided to do the basement patrol with a flashlight for funsies. I was sweeping the light into the offices when I saw a semi-transparent man staring back at me from inside one of the rooms. Well, I nearly shit myself before I realized I'd caught my own reflection in the glass because of the flashlight. About 15 years ago, I was a guard at a pastry manufacturing plant. At night, it was a cold, creepy place filled with weird machinery and is very much in a really bad part of town. There was a catwalk above some machines that led to offices with long metal staircase. Around the beginning of this staircase was a metal cage with a gate I had the key to. Nobody else was there. Up on the catwalk, there were hooks with lab coats, 3 coats with 5 hooks. All were hung on the side where the catwalk met the stairs, so the far 2 hooks were empty. After I made my round this night, I came back and noticed 1 coat moved from the middle hook to the far hook. I unlocked the gate, closed and locked it behind me to check the offices. This was about 8 p.m., and the last of the employees had left, but I figured maybe one returned. Catwalk was empty, and so were the offices. There was no other way down, so now I'm a little freaked out, but I figure it's just my mind. So I go back down, lock the gate, and head to the lounge area. The next round is done, and the coats are moved, each hanging on an alternating hook. Now I'm a little pissed, thinking someone is definitely messing with me. Back up to the catwalk, empty. Check the offices, empty. Lock the gate and check the back and front doors. They're all locked shut. Alarm is on. I go back to the lounge and lock myself in there. F whatever was going on. Check the monitors we had. Nothing. Every time I did a round, the coats changed. I actually stopped doing rounds and figured if they want to fire me, I don't care. I got a new assignment after that and never went back. I asked other guards who had that assignment and was told that weird things did indeed happen there with no explanation. My dad used to work security guard jobs after he retired because he could. He was on site overnight shift at a paper mill here in Oregon that's part of a small town and is at the edge of the Cascades. He noticed over the course of about 3 nights that all of a sudden, all the little critters he was used to seeing in the lumber yard were just gone. It was weird and quiet, and he was about to set out on his rounds when something made him pause and take a big step backwards into the cover of the guard shack. It's a good thing, too, because the great horned owl's talons missed his head by about 6 inches. Those birds are effing big, and they're territorial as F. Dad said they stuck around just long enough to kill every living thing under about 30 pounds in the area, and then they moved on. Had a young female commit suicide in her car in the parking lot of a Harley-Davidson shop in the middle of the night. Years and other jobs later, I took a new job and was seated next to who was a guy who turned out to be the boyfriend of the girl at the time. They were newly dating, and he never understood what happened. I could tell the weight of it was still very much on his shoulders. I was able to confirm details as to what happened and answer questions. 2 weeks later, my previous job called and begged me back. I worked there long enough to run into this guy, share the story, and set him closer to peace, then left and went back to my old job. Fate? So I did patrols for a business district in my city. 4 buildings, about 20 floors or so each. You have one partner at the desk watching CCTV, and one who patrols all buildings, then they switch. Anyways, it was like 3 a.m. I'm on patrol. All buildings are basically locked tight. I check to make sure each door on each floor is locked, then check the stairwell. Can be really spooky since it's late, dark, and you're alone. Anyways, I was on like 12th floor or something, opened the stairwell door, and there's just a dude there. Didn't look homeless, he had a sleeping bag. I escort him out of the building, no fuss, but he also didn't say a word. No idea how he got in. My partner told me he ran into him in the same way once before. I used to patrol at night for a school district, and one night we got a call from dispatch that there were some kids at the school that called them saying they were there and that they should send a guard. It seemed off, since why would they self-incriminate that they were trespassing? Regardless, they told me to go and check. While about halfway there, my supervisor tells me over the radio to not go and that he'll take my call. I stop into a gas station for some snacks and am sitting in the car when he gives me an update. My supervisor contracted and contacted the police and arrived with them. They found the kids hiding in the bushes with knives ready to ambush me. They were arrested, but I couldn't help but think what could have happened had my supervisor not intervened, and it was shortly after that I decided to pursue a new line of work.
Well, that was really good of your supervisor to have, the idea to think that maybe you should take this call a little more seriously and have police with them. So, yeah, that could have been terrible. So, glad it worked out.
I worked as an overnight security guard back in 2007 for an electronics manufacturing company. They had 4 large warehouses that I checked throughout the night. Only one of the warehouses was used for production and also contained the C-suites. They did have 1 or 2 employees there overnight, but it wasn't unusual for me to not see them during a shift. As I was walking through the offices and C-suites, I checked every door to make sure they were locked. They also had some supply closets that I checked as well, but they didn't need to be locked. So I'm going along checking each door and opening each closet. I pull open a closet door and a man on the floor sits up. I scream, "Jesus Christ!" and immediately slam the door. My entire body was shaking with adrenaline. After just a sec, I realized he must be an employee, so I opened the door again to see why he's in there. Apparently, he's a diabetic and sometimes lays down somewhere quiet and out of the way when he doesn't feel good. I still thought it was a strange place to lay down, but holy shit, that has to have been the scariest moment I had.